Welcome to this Forge College Explainer. Grab your trench coat and your magnifying glass because today we are putting on our detective hats to become EVM forensic analysts. We're looking at the synthesis of opcode patterns and constraints. If you've been following along in the Ethereum fundamentals track, you know we're right in the thick of the EVM deep dive, specifically looking at execution and environment and the EVM instruction set. I am absolutely pumped to guide you through this because we're about to take raw, gritty EVM data and turn it into a genuinely fascinating story.
First, though, a really quick context switch. We are pivoting hard from our last lesson on integrating Solana AI tooling into projects and validating enhancements straight back into the low-level mechanics of Ethereum execution logs. Obviously, it's quite a jump from AI tooling back down to the metal, but it's an absolutely essential one to round out your fundamentals.
So, let's dive into the core mystery. When a transaction reverts or fails, we're usually left staring at these massive blocks of raw opcode traces. And honestly, at first glance, it just looks like absolute gibberish. But I promise you, it's actually a timeline of clues. The big question we need to answer today is this: why do innocent, perfectly normal opcodes suddenly fail when placed under pressure? Here's our investigator's syllabus for today. We'll quickly cover 1. Welcome to EVM forensics. 2. Constraint-driven behavior. 3. Reading trace timelines. 4. 3 recurring opcode suspects. 5. Creating synthesis notes. And finally, 6. Capstone readiness.
Section 1. Welcome to EVM forensics.
To start solving these trace cases, we really have to understand the underlying laws of the EVM universe, because nothing here happens in a vacuum. Let's look at our primary suspects, execution constraints. These are your system limits, things like stack depth, gas accounting step costs, and memory expansion. And what's crazy is how these totally invisible constraints are the actual culprits manipulating our opcodes. You might have a sequence of calls that looks completely fine on paper, but behind the scenes, a stack height limit is secretly choking the life out of your transaction.
Which brings us to Section 2, Constraint-Driven Behavior.
This requires a massive mental shift in how we investigate trace failures. We need to completely rethink our debugging approach. So the big takeaway here is that we have to stop blaming the innocent opcodes and start looking at the constraints forcing their hand. Think about it like getting a flat tire on the highway. You don't blame the rubber for going flat. You look for the nail on the road. Opcodes like STORE or SLOAD, they're just following orders. It's the constraint, the nail, that's causing the catastrophic revert.
All right, Section 3. Reading trace timelines.
Let's pull out the blueprints, look right at the crime scene, and see how this builds our case line by line. In Step 1, the setup from hex 00 to 04 usually involves cheap memory writes. But if they exceed allocated memory, boom, you trigger a massive memory expansion gas check. Step 2 is an input check using called data size and a conditional jump. This introduces branch-gated gas, meaning one path is cheap and the other is wildly expensive. Step 3, the caller check, is where stack height gets tested while addresses are being compared. And finally, Step 4, the storage phase. This shows a classic read, modify, write sequence where gas consumption can just absolutely spike based on the slot's history.
Moving on to Section 4, 3 recurring opcode suspects.
Every good detective knows the repeat offenders in their city, right? Well, in the EVM, traces aren't just random events. They almost always fall into one of 3 very specific recurring opcode patterns. Our first suspect is the authorization branch before a storage write. Check out the timeline here. We check the caller, compare it with EQ, use Jumpy to conditionally branch the execution path, and then, and only then, we execute an SLOAD. The problem here is that branching gates expensive instructions. If an authorization check is misordered, your transaction might suddenly end up paying a massive gas cost just to read a cold storage slot, causing a revert if gas is tight.
Our second suspect involves loop-style repeated SLOADs, and this brilliantly illustrates the brutal pricing difference between a costly first touch, which we call cold storage access, and a much cheaper repeated touch known as warm storage access. If you've got logic that expects a cheap, constant cost read because the slot was warm during your local testing, it is going to catastrophically break in a reentrancy scenario or across different callers when that same slot suddenly becomes cold and expensive again.
Our third suspect is dynamic memory growth. And honestly, this is a classic frame job. A completely innocent STORE gets blamed for a revert. You look at the trace and you're thinking, why did STORE fail? It's so cheap. But the actual culprit was a massive memory expansion gas spike right before it.
A seemingly small loop computed a dynamic offset, wrote beyond the current allocation with a called out a copy, and the per iteration gas just escalated non-linearly. Poor STORE just happened to be the one left holding the bag when the gas ran out.
So, here is your ultimate detective's cheat sheet. It maps the exact sequence motifs we just talked about to their specific execution constraints and the trace signals you need to spot. See repeated SLOADs? Immediately check the gas difference for cold versus warm pricing. Spot a called out a copy followed by STOREs? Check for a sudden jump in memory gas. Mapping a failing trace to these specific patterns is exactly what stops you from endlessly chasing irrelevant low-level symptoms.
Section 5. Creating synthesis notes.
We've got our suspects and our clues. Now we need to organize our findings into a case file by extracting pattern context pairs. This speeds up triage immensely. And the absolute best part? You don't even have to do all this manually. You can convert this abstract pattern recognition into an automatable extraction step using a Python script. By parsing JSON traces, you can literally set up a sliding window of about 5 opcodes to automatically scan for our 3 key suspect patterns. If the window catches a caller, an EQ, and a jump sci right next to an SSTORE, the script just flags it as an authorization before right suspect. It's like having your own automated forensics lab running in the background.
And that brings us to Section 6, Capstone Readiness.
We've gathered the clues, we understand the constraints, and we've even automated our pattern recognition. We are totally ready to compile our final synthesis notes and head into the capstone analysis. As you prepare for your capstone, keep these 3 golden principles in mind. First, read traces as causal chains. Opcodes are probes revealing constraints. They are not disconnected events. Second, always map patterns to constraints before trying to fix the code. Knowing whether you're dealing with memory expansion or a cold read completely changes your remediation strategy. And third, always write compact checklists. Pattern, constraint, trace exemplar. Use these as high-yield heuristics for much faster triage.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought. When your next capstone trace inevitably reverts, which constraint are you going to interrogate first? Is it going to be cold storage, memory expansion, or maybe a sneaky stack limit? Thank you so much for joining this Forge College Explainer. Make sure you head over to forge.college to learn more about this subject, dive even deeper into Web3, and really master your detective skills. Until next time, happy investigating.